It was a chilly morning in New York City, the kind where the wind nips at your cheeks and you can see your breath as you walk. The streets buzzed with the usual chaos, honking taxis, hurried pedestrians, and the faint hum of distant conversations. Inside the studio of The View, however, things were quieter, almost calm, except for the electric anticipation crackling in the air. Today was no ordinary day. Two legends of Hollywood were set to appear on the show together: Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro. Clint Eastwood arrived first, stepping out of his car with the same effortless cool he'd carried for decades. At 82, he still had that unmistakable presence, tall, lean, and sharp-eyed, like a man who could stare down trouble without blinking. He walked into the green room with his hands in his pockets, nodding politely at the crew but not saying much. That was Clint's way. He didn't waste words or make a fuss, he just wanted to get the job done. He grabbed a cup of black coffee from the counter and settled into a chair near the window, flipping through a magazine without really paying attention. His mind seemed miles away, lost in thought. A few minutes later, the door swung open again, and in walked Robert De Niro. If Eastwood was calm waters, De Niro was a storm. Even in his late 60s, he moved with restless energy, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for something or someone to engage with. He greeted the crew warmly, shaking hands and cracking jokes, instantly lighting up the space. Unlike Eastwood, who preferred silence, De Niro thrived on conversation. Within moments, he was deep in discussion with one of the producers, talking passionately about films, politics, and even the weather. The two men couldn't have been more different. Eastwood sat quietly in his corner, sipping his coffee and observing everything with a detached curiosity. De Niro, meanwhile, paced back and forth, gesturing wildly as he spoke. It wasn't long before their contrasting personalities started to rub against each other. When De Niro noticed Eastwood sitting there, he walked over with a friendly smile. "Hey, Clint," he said, extending a hand. "Didn't expect to run into you here." Eastwood looked up, gave a brief nod, and shook his hand. "Yeah, figured I'd stop by," he replied in his trademark gravelly voice. There was no warmth in his tone, just polite acknowledgement. De Niro didn't seem fazed. He pulled up a chair and sat down across from him, ready to chat. "So, what do you think of this whole setup?" he asked, gesturing toward the cameras. Being set up outside the green room, Eastwood shrugged. "Seems fine, just another gig." De Niro chuckled. "Another gig? Come on, Clint, this is The View. You know how these daytime shows are, they love drama." "That's why I try to keep it simple," Eastwood said, taking another sip of his coffee. De Niro raised an eyebrow. "Simple? Where's the fun? In that?" And just like that, the tension began to simmer beneath the surface. De Niro launched into a story about a recent film project, describing the intense preparation he'd put into his role. He talked about method acting, immersing himself in the character's world and how it helped him deliver authentic performances. Eastwood listened for a while, his expression unreadable, but eventually he interrupted. "You ever think maybe less is more?" Eastwood asked, his voice steady but firm. "Not every role needs all that extra effort." De Niro frowned slightly. "Extra effort? Are you saying my process is unnecessary?" "I'm saying some people overcomplicate things," Eastwood replied, leaning back in his chair. "Sometimes you just need to trust yourself and let the scene play out." De Niro bristled at that. Overcomplicating or committing to the craft? The producer peeked her head in then, reminding them they were on in 10 minutes. Both men nodded, but the tension lingered. As they prepared to head out, it was clear that this meeting of titans wasn't going to be smooth sailing. Their egos, their philosophies, and their very different approaches to life and art were destined to collide. And little did anyone know, the sparks would fly far beyond the confines of the green room. The stage was set, and the energy in the studio was electric. The audience had been buzzing with excitement for hours, eagerly awaiting the arrival of two of Hollywood's biggest legends. When Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro finally walked onto the set, the applause was thunderous. Both men smiled briefly, Eastwood's smile was subtle, almost imperceptible, while De Niro beamed widely, soaking in the adoration. They took their seats at the round table, flanked by the show's hosts, and the cameras rolled. At first, everything seemed fine. The host kicked things off with light, friendly questions, asking them about their long careers and iconic roles. Eastwood answered in his usual terse style, giving short, thoughtful responses that made the audience chuckle. "You've been in the business for decades," the host said. "What's the secret to staying relevant?" Eastwood shrugged. "Just keep showing up. Don't overthink it." De Niro, on the other hand, leaned forward, eager to share his perspective. "For me, it's about growth," he said, his voice full of conviction. "Every role is a chance to learn something new, to challenge yourself. You can't stay stuck in one place if you want to evolve as an artist." The contrast between the two was striking. Eastwood's answers were measured and concise, while De Niro spoke passionately, often going off on tangents. The audience loved both styles, clapping enthusiastically after each response. But beneath the surface, the tension from earlier was still simmering, waiting for the right moment to boil over. It didn't take long. The conversation shifted to acting techniques, and that's when things got tricky. One of the hosts asked them how they approached their craft differently. Eastwood went first, explaining his philosophy in simple terms. "I don't believe in all this method stuff," he said. "You show up, say your lines, and let the camera do the rest. It's not rocket science." De Niro's eyes narrowed slightly, but he kept his tone polite. "Well, I think there's more to it than that," he countered. "Acting isn't just about saying lines, it's about living them. You have to understand the character inside and out, feel what they feel. Otherwise, it's just empty." Eastwood tilted his head, studying De Niro for a moment before replying. "Empty? Or efficient? Not every movie needs to change the world. Sometimes people just want to be entertained." The audience murmured, sensing the undercurrent of disagreement. The host tried to smooth things over. "Different strokes for different folks, right?" she joked, laughing nervously. But De Niro wasn't ready to let it go. "Sure, entertainment has its place," he said, his voice rising slightly. "But why settle for mediocrity when you can aim higher? Why not push boundaries and explore deeper truths?" Eastwood's jaw tightened, and for the first time, a flicker of irritation crossed his face. "Mediocrity? Is that what you think I'm doing?" The room fell silent. Even the hosts looked uneasy, unsure of how to navigate the sudden shift in tone. De Niro hesitated, realizing he might have gone too far, but then he pressed on. "I didn't say that about you specifically," he clarified, "but I do think some actors and directors play it safe instead of taking risks, and that's a shame." Eastwood stared at him, his piercing blue eyes locking onto De Niro's. For a moment, it felt like the entire studio was holding its breath. Then, in his signature low growl, Eastwood responded, "Safe? Maybe. But at least my movies make money. Can't say the same for all those deep films of yours." Gasps rippled through the audience. No one expected Eastwood to throw a jab like that, especially not on live television. De Niro's face flushed red, and he sat up straighter, clearly stung. "Money isn't everything," he shot back. "Art should mean something. It should resonate with people, not just fill their wallets." The host jumped in again, trying desperately to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "Let's talk about some of your favorite roles," she suggested brightly, hoping to diffuse the tension, but it was too late. The gloves were off, and neither man was backing down. As the debate raged on, the audience became increasingly divided. Some cheered for Eastwood, appreciating his no-nonsense attitude and practical approach. Others sided with De Niro, admiring his passion and dedication to his craft. Social media exploded with reactions as viewers watching at home weighed in on who they thought was right. Despite the growing hostility, there was a strange kind of magnetism to the exchange. These weren't just two actors arguing. They represented two entirely different philosophies about art, success, and life itself. Eastwood embodied the old-school mentality, straightforward, reliable, and unapologetically pragmatic. De Niro, meanwhile, stood for the avant-garde, the relentless pursuit of depth and meaning. Their clash wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. By the time the segment reached its halfway point, the atmosphere in the studio was thick with tension. The hosts exchanged worried glances, unsure of how to reel the situation back in. Meanwhile, Eastwood and De Niro continued trading barbs, each determined to have the last word. It was clear that this wasn't just a disagreement about acting techniques anymore. It had become something much bigger, a battle of egos and ideologies. And everyone watching knew that this was only the beginning. The tension in the studio had reached a fever pitch. The audience, once cheering and clapping politely, now sat on edge, unsure whether to laugh, gasp, or stay silent. The playful banter between Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro had morphed into something sharper, more personal. It was no longer just about acting techniques or artistic philosophies. It felt like a clash of two titans, each unwilling to yield an inch. De Niro leaned forward in his chair, his voice rising as he pressed his point. "You talk about making movies that make money," he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "But what about leaving a legacy? What about creating work that stands the test of time?" Eastwood didn't flinch. He crossed his arms and gave De Niro a long, hard stare before responding. "Legacy is great if you've got time for it," he said dryly. "But I'm too busy working to worry about how history will remember me." The audience tittered nervously, unsure whether to applaud Eastwood's bluntness or cringe at the obvious dig. De Niro's face flushed again, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. Working or coasting because there's a difference. That hit a nerve. Eastwood's expression darkened, and for the first time a flicker of anger broke through, his usual stoic facade. "Coasting?" he repeated, his gravelly voice low and dangerous. "You think I've been coasting all these years?" De Niro held his ground, though his hands gripped the edges of his chair tighter. "I'm not saying you haven't worked hard, but sometimes playing it safe means missing out on opportunities to really challenge yourself or your audience." The yow. Host tried to intervene, sensing the conversation was spiraling out of control. "Let's take a step back here," she said quickly, forcing a smile. "Both of you have accomplished so much. Isn't it amazing how different paths can lead to success?" But neither man was listening. Eastwood leaned forward, his piercing blue eyes locked onto De Niro. "Challenge the audience or confuse them? Half the time, people don't even know what your movies are about." The audience erupted into murmurs. Some laughed nervously, while others nodded in agreement. De Niro bristled visibly, his jaw tightening. Confuse them or make them think? Not everything has to be spoon-fed to people, Clint. Eastwood smirked, a hint of disdain creeping into his voice. "Maybe. But if they walk out of the theater scratching their heads, did you really do your job?" De Niro shot back immediately. "And if they walk out feeling nothing because the movie was forgettable, did you do yours?" The room fell silent again, the weight of the insult hanging heavy in the air. Eastwood didn't respond right away. Instead, he sat back in his chair, his lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, it seemed like he might let it slide. But then slowly, deliberately, he spoke. "Forgettable? You're calling my work forgettable?" De Niro hesitated, perhaps realizing he'd gone too far, but pride and adrenaline kept him going. "I'm saying some of it doesn't stick, and maybe that's because it's comfortable, predictable." Predictable. The word hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Eastwood's eyes narrowed, and his voice dropped to a near whisper, but it carried across the entire studio. "Comfortable, predictable. Is that what you think of me? Or are you just mad because I don't need to cry over every script to get the job done?" The audience gasped audibly. Even the crew behind the cameras exchanged shocked glances. No. One expected Eastwood to go there, to call out De Niro's famously intense method acting so bluntly. De Niro's face turned beet red, and for a moment, it looked like he might explode. But instead, he took a deep breath, composing himself. "You don't understand what it takes to go deep. De Niro said, his voice trembling with barely contained frustration. To lose yourself in a role, to become someone else entirely, it's not easy. And maybe that's why you don't respect it. Eastwood shook his head, his tone dismissive. Respect it? Sure, but I don't worship it. Acting's a job, not a religion. The host, desperate to regain control, jumped in again. Okay, let's pivot for a second, she said, her voice strained. What about directing? Both of you have directed incredible films. How does that process differ from acting? For a brief moment, it seemed like the question might defuse the situation. Eastwood relaxed slightly, leaning back in his chair. Directing's simpler, he said. You tell people where to stand, when to move, and how to say their lines. Done. De Niro rolled his eyes, clearly exasperated. Simpler? That's exactly why some directors struggle to get real performances out of their actors. They don't push them enough. Eastwood raised an eyebrow. Push them? Or torture them? Heard some stories about your sets, Bobby. De Niro's mouth opened, ready to fire back, but the host cut him off. All right, she said, laughing nervously. Let's take a quick commercial break. As the cameras cut away, the tension in the studio was palpable. The audience whispered among themselves, buzzing with excitement and disbelief. Meanwhile, Eastwood and De Niro sat silently, refusing to look at each other. The host leaned over, trying to lighten the mood with a joke, but neither man cracked a smile. Backstage, the producers scrambled to figure out what to do next. This wasn't supposed to happen. A light-hearted chat between two legends turning into a verbal brawl. But as chaotic as it was, no one could deny it was riveting. The audience was glued to their seats, hanging on every word. Social media was ablaze with reactions, memes flooding timelines, and hashtags trending worldwide. When the commercial break ended, the host returned, her smile wider than ever. Welcome back, she chirped, attempting to steer the conversation toward lighter topics. Let's talk about awards season. Both of you have won Oscars. What does that recognition mean to you? Eastwood shrugged nonchalantly. It's nice, I guess. But it doesn't change who you are or what you do. De Niro, still simmering with frustration, seized the opportunity to take another jab. Some of us win Oscars for our work, he said pointedly. Others win for entertainment value. Eastwood's eyes flashed, and the audience collectively held their breath. It was clear this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The host's question about award season had only poured fuel onto the fire. De Niro's comment about winning Oscars for entertainment value hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and ominous. Eastwood didn't respond immediately. Instead, he sat perfectly still, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on De Niro with an intensity that made even the crew uneasy. For a moment, it felt like time itself had frozen. Finally, Eastwood leaned forward slightly, his voice low but razor-sharp. Entertainment value, he repeated slowly, as if tasting the words. You think my movies are just fluff? That they don't have meaning? De Niro hesitated, perhaps sensing he'd pushed too far this time. But pride, or maybe sheer stubbornness, kept him from backing down. I didn't say fluff, he replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. But come on, Clint. Some of your films are, let's just say, lighter fare. The audience murmured again, torn between discomfort and fascination. Eastwood's face remained unreadable, but his next words cut through the tension like a knife. Lighter fare, he echoed. And what about your movies? Half of them leave people scratching their heads, wondering what the hell they just watched. De Niro stiffened, visibly offended. At least people feel something when they watch my work, he shot back. They're not just sitting there waiting for the credits to roll. Eastwood smirked, clearly unimpressed. Feel something? Or feel confused? There's a difference. The host, now visibly sweating under the pressure, tried once more to steer the conversation away from disaster. All right, she said, her cheerful demeanor starting to crack. Let's focus on the positives here. Both of you have inspired millions of fans around the world. What do you think makes a movie truly memorable? It was a valiant attempt, but neither man took the bait. De Niro turned toward the host, his frustration bubbling over. What makes a movie memorable is authenticity, he said firmly. When actors pour their souls into a role, when directors challenge conventions, that's what sticks with people. Eastwood snorted softly, shaking his head. Authenticity, he muttered under his breath, loud enough for everyone to hear. Then, raising his voice slightly, he added, "You know what else sticks with people? A good story told well. No fancy tricks, no overthinking, just solid storytelling." De Niro shot him a sharp look. Solid storytelling doesn't mean playing. It's safe. Sometimes you need to take risks to create something extraordinary. Risks? Eastwood countered, his tone dripping with skepticism. Or just showing off? Not every movie needs to be some grand statement, Bobby. Sometimes it's okay to give people what they want. A little action, a little romance, a happy ending. De Niro shook his head, his voice rising with emotion. Happy endings. Sure, they're nice. But life isn't always happy, Clint. Movies should reflect that. They should challenge us, make us uncomfortable, force us to confront things we'd rather ignore. Eastwood raised an eyebrow, his expression almost amused despite the tension. Force us? Is that why half your movies end with everyone miserable or dead? The audience erupted into laughter, unable to help themselves. Even, the host cracked a nervous smile, though she quickly tried to regain control of the situation. Let's remember, folks, we're celebrating great cinema here, she chirped, her voice wavering slightly. But Eastwood wasn't done yet. He leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, and delivered the final blow. Look, I get it. You like to dig deep, explore the dark corners of the human soul. Fine, but don't act like my way is somehow less valid. People laugh, people cry, people cheer at my movies, and guess what? They walk out feeling good. Not lost or depressed or whatever it is you're aiming for. De Niro opened his mouth to retort, but suddenly, Eastwood stood up. The movement was so abrupt, so unexpected, that everyone, including De Niro, froze. For a second, it seemed like Eastwood might storm off without another word. Instead, he looked directly at De Niro, his piercing gaze unwavering. "You've got your style, I've got mine," he said simply. End of discussion. With that, he turned and walked off the set, leaving behind a stunned audience, a speechless host, and a seething De Niro. The cameras stayed rolling, capturing every second of the surreal moment. De Niro stared after Eastwood, his face a mix of anger and disbelief before finally leaning back in his chair with a sigh. "Well," the host said weakly, attempting to salvage the segment, "that was certainly lively. Let's give a round of applause for Robert De Niro and his incredible career." The audience clapped politely, though their energy was subdued. Many were still processing what had just happened. Had Clint Eastwood really walked off live television? Was this real life? Social media exploded once again, with reactions ranging from outrage to admiration. Some praised Eastwood for standing his ground, while others criticized him for being rude. Meanwhile, clips of the heated exchange began circulating online, racking up millions of views within minutes. Backstage, Eastwood didn't stick around to see the fallout. He grabbed his coat, nodded briefly at the producer who thanked him for coming, and disappeared into the New York morning. Out on the street, paparazzi swarmed him, shouting questions about what had happened. Eastwood ignored them, climbing into his car without a word. As the vehicle pulled away, one reporter managed to yell, "Clint, any regrets?" Eastwood rolled down his window just enough to answer. "Regrets? Nah. Sometimes you've got to know when to call it quits." And with that, he was gone, leaving behind a city and a nation, still buzzing about the unforgettable showdown. The fallout from the explosive clash between Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro spread faster than anyone could have anticipated. By mid-afternoon, the story had taken over every major news outlet, social media platform, and entertainment blog. Clips of their heated exchange were everywhere, shared, dissected, and debated by millions. For some, it was a shocking reminder of how even legends weren't immune to ego battles. For others, it was thrilling drama, the kind you couldn't look away from. Back at the View studio, the atmosphere remained tense long after Eastwood's abrupt exit. Robert De Niro stayed seated on the set, visibly rattled but determined to finish the segment. The host tried her best to keep things light, asking him about his upcoming projects and favorite roles. But it was clear De Niro's mind was elsewhere. His answers were clipped, his usual enthusiasm replaced by a simmering frustration that lingered beneath the surface. When the show finally wrapped, De Niro retreated to the green room, where he sat alone for several minutes, staring at the floor. A producer cautiously approached him, offering water and thanking him for sticking it out despite the chaos. De Niro nodded absently, muttering something under his breath before grabbing his coat and heading outside. Reporters swarmed him as soon as he stepped onto the sidewalk, shouting questions about what had happened with Eastwood. "Do you regret anything you said?" one reporter asked. De Niro stopped walking and turned to face the crowd. "Regret? No," he replied firmly, though there was a hint of weariness in his voice. "I believe in what I said, and I stand by it. Art is supposed to challenge people, to make them think, to make them feel. If that makes me difficult, so be it." The reporters pressed on, eager for more sound bites. "What did you think when Clint walked off?" another shouted. De Niro sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, Clint's entitled to his opinion, just like I'm entitled to mine. We're two different people with two very different approaches to our work. That doesn't mean either of us is wrong. It just means we see things differently." With that, he signaled for his car, climbed inside, and drove off, leaving behind a sea of flashing cameras and unanswered questions. Despite his calm demeanor, insiders later revealed that De Niro was deeply affected by the confrontation. While he respected Eastwood as an actor and filmmaker, the public disagreement left him feeling unsettled, a rare moment of vulnerability for someone known for his unshakable confidence. Meanwhile, Eastwood seemed unfazed by the backlash. Back in his hotel suite, he poured himself a glass of bourbon and settled into an armchair, flipping through channels until he found coverage of the incident. He watched silently, his expression unreadable, as talking heads analyzed every word of the argument. Some defended him, praising his no-nonsense attitude and refusal to engage in pretense. Others criticized him, calling him arrogant or dismissive. Eastwood listened to it all without comment, occasionally letting out a low chuckle or shaking his head. Later that evening, a close friend visited Eastwood and asked him point-blank, "Was it worth it? Walking off like that?" Eastwood shrugged, swirling his drink thoughtfully. "Worth it? I don't know about that, but sometimes you've got to draw a line. You can't let people push you around, even if they're good at what they do. And Bobby? Well, he's great at what he does. But we're not cut from the same cloth." His friend nodded, sensing that Eastwood wasn't interested in dwelling on the matter. Instead, they changed the subject, discussing Eastwood's next project and plans for the future. By the time the conversation ended, Eastwood seemed completely at ease, as if the entire incident had already faded into the background. As the days passed, the public reaction continued to evolve. Some fans rallied behind Eastwood, applauding his straightforwardness and unwillingness to indulge in what they saw as unnecessary theatrics. They praised him for staying true to his principles, even if it meant burning bridges. Others sided with De Niro, admiring his passion and dedication to pushing boundaries in art. Many argued that both men had valid points, that their differing philosophies reflected broader debates about creativity, success, and the purpose of storytelling. In interviews that followed, both actors addressed the controversy briefly but diplomatically. During a press conference for his latest film, De Niro acknowledged the clash, saying, "Clint and I are passionate about our work, and sometimes passions collide. I respect him as an artist, even if we don't always agree." At the end of the day, it's healthy to have these kinds of discussions. They remind us why we care so much about what we do. Eastwood, ever the minimalist, offered a similarly restrained response when questioned during a promotional event. "It was a difference of opinion," he said simply. "Nothing personal. We're both professionals and we'll move on. End of story." Despite their measured comments, the incident left a lasting impression on Hollywood and beyond. It became a cautionary tale about the dangers of mixing strong personalities and high-stakes platforms. producers of talk shows began vetting guests more carefully, wary of inviting individuals with known rivalries or conflicting views. Meanwhile, fans continued to debate who had come out on top in the verbal sparring match. Was Eastwood's blunt honesty more effective, or did De Niro's fiery passion win the day? What made the story truly fascinating, however, was its deeper resonance. Beyond the spectacle of two icons clashing, it highlighted the enduring tension between tradition and innovation, simplicity and complexity, comfort and challenge. Eastwood represented the old guard, practical, efficient, and grounded in reality. De Niro embodied the avant-garde, ambitious, experimental, and driven by emotion. Their disagreement wasn't just about acting or filmmaking, it was about fundamentally different ways of seeing the world. Years later, the incident would still be referenced in conversations about legendary Hollywood feuds. Both men moved on with their careers, continuing to produce work that reflected their unique perspectives. Yet the memory of that fateful morning on The View remained, a testament to the power of personality, conviction, and the timeless allure of creative conflict. Months after the infamous clash on The View, life for both Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro returned to its usual rhythm. The media circus eventually died down, replaced by newer headlines and fresher controversies. But the echoes of that day lingered, not just in Hollywood circles but also among fans who couldn't stop talking about it. For many, the confrontation became more than just a heated argument. It symbolized two opposing philosophies of art, success, and life itself. Clint Eastwood went back to his routine, diving into his next project with characteristic focus. He was directing another film, a gritty Western drama that felt quintessentially Eastwood. On set, he was as calm and composed as ever, giving concise instructions to his cast and crew without raising his voice or losing patience. When asked privately if the incident with De Niro still weighed on him, Eastwood shrugged it off. "Nah," he said with a wry smile. "That's water under the bridge. We're both pros. No hard feelings." And yet there were moments when Eastwood revealed a hint of reflection. During breaks between takes, he'd sometimes sit alone in his chair, staring off into the distance. A young assistant once mustered the courage to ask him what he thought about during those quiet moments. Eastwood chuckled softly. "Just thinking," he replied, "about how people see things differently, how we all want the same thing, to make something worthwhile, but go about it in our own ways." Over on the East Coast, Robert De Niro was equally busy. He threw himself into preparing for his next role, immersing himself in research and character development with the same intensity that had defined his career. Friends noticed that while he seemed outwardly unaffected by the fallout from the side view, there was a subtle shift in his demeanor. He spoke less about awards and accolades and more about the importance of staying grounded despite fame. At a press junket for his latest movie, a reporter brought up the topic again, asking De Niro if he'd reached out to Eastwood since their public disagreement. De Niro shook his head. "No, I haven't called him," he admitted, "but I don't hold grudges. What happened, happened. Maybe someday we'll cross paths again, and we'll laugh about it." Privately, however, insiders claimed that Niro had been deeply affected by the experience. It wasn't so much about Eastwood's words, but the realization that even someone as respected as him could be vulnerable to criticism. In interviews afterward, De Niro began emphasizing the value of humility in creative pursuits. "You can push boundaries all you want," he told one journalist, "but at the end of the day, it's not about proving yourself right. It's about telling stories that matter." As time passed, the dust settled, and both men continued to carve out their legacies in their own distinct ways. Eastwood released his new film to critical acclaim, earning praise for its raw simplicity and emotional depth. Fans marveled at how effortlessly he captured human struggles without overcomplicating them. Meanwhile, De Niro delivered another powerhouse performance in a dark, introspective drama that left audiences debating its meaning long after the credits rolled. Critics hailed it as yet another example of his ability to dive deep into complex characters. Interestingly, the clash between the two legends sparked broader conversations about creativity and collaboration. Film students analyzed their differing approaches in classrooms, while directors cited their debate as a reminder of the diversity within storytelling. Some argued that Eastwood's minimalist style offered clarity and universality, making his work accessible to wide audiences. Others championed De Niro's method-driven intensity, praising its ability to evoke powerful emotions and provoke thought. Years later, when reflecting on their careers, both men occasionally acknowledged the other's contributions to cinema, albeit indirectly. In an interview celebrating his 50th year in Hollywood, Eastwood was asked which actor he admired most. After a pause, he mentioned De Niro. "He's relentless," Eastwood said simply. "Different from me, sure, but you have to respect that kind of dedication." De Niro, too, paid tribute to Eastwood during a retrospective of his own career. When prompted to name a director whose work he admired, he hesitated before saying, "Clint. He gets the job done, no fuss, no drama. There's beauty in that." Though they never formally reconciled or worked together, their mutual respect grew quietly over time. It was a testament to the fact that even the fiercest disagreements could lead to understanding, if not outright friendship. Their clash on The View remained a defining moment in pop culture history, often referenced as proof that passionate debates could coexist with admiration. Ultimately, the story of Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro's heated encounter served as a reminder of something universal. Life is richer when we embrace differences. Whether through art, conversation, or conflict, these contrasts challenge us to grow, to question, and to appreciate the myriad ways people express themselves. And perhaps in some small way, that's exactly what both men intended all along, even if neither would admit it. Years rolled by and the world moved forward as it always does. New stars emerged, trends shifted, and Hollywood continued to reinvent itself. Yet the memory of that explosive day on The View refused to fade entirely. It became one of those rare moments in entertainment history that people referenced whenever discussing iconic rivalries or legendary clashes. The story lived on, not just because of the drama, but because it encapsulated something timeless about human nature. Our need to stand firm in what we believe, even when it puts us at odds with others. For Clint Eastwood, life carried on much as it always had. He remained a figure of quiet strength, working steadily behind the camera and occasionally stepping in front of it. His later films often reflected his philosophy, simple yet profound, unapologetically raw, and deeply rooted in real-world struggles. Fans noticed that while his style hadn't changed, there was a newfound warmth in some of his storytelling. It wasn't overt, but subtle hints suggested he'd softened slightly over time, perhaps influenced by the lessons learned from past encounters, including the infamous showdown with De Niro. In interviews, Eastwood rarely mentioned the incident directly. When pressed, he'd offer a brief comment, usually brushing it off as just one of those things. But those closest to him knew better. A longtime collaborator once revealed that Eastwood kept a framed photo of himself and De Niro backstage at an award ceremony years earlier. "He doesn't talk about it," the collaborator said, "but I think he respects the guy more than he lets on." As for Robert De Niro, age brought a different kind of evolution. While he remained as passionate and driven as ever, there was a noticeable shift in how he approached his craft and life in general. In his interviews, he began speaking less about perfection and more about connection. "At the end of the day," he told a journalist during the promotion of a biographical film, "it's not about being the best actor or making the most groundbreaking movie. It's about touching someone's heart or mind, even if it's just for a moment." This softer side of De Niro surprised many who only knew him through his intense performances. Friends noted that he seemed more reflective, taking time to mentor younger actors and share insights gained from decades in the industry. During a Q&A session at a film festival, a young actress asked him how to handle criticism without letting it derail her confidence. De Niro smiled thoughtfully before answering, "You listen, you learn, and then you move on. Not everyone will agree with your choices, and that's okay." What matters is staying true to yourself. Despite their vastly different paths, both men found ways to adapt to changing times while staying true to their core identities. Eastwood embraced technology cautiously, experimenting with digital filmmaking techniques but never abandoning his preference for practical effects and straightforward narratives. De Niro, meanwhile, ventured into producing and supporting independent films, championing voices that might otherwise go unheard. Their contributions to cinema ensured they remained relevant, even as newer generations took center stage. Interestingly, the legacy of their clash extended beyond Hollywood. Business leaders, artists, and educators often cited the debate between Eastwood and De Niro as an example of how opposing viewpoints could spark meaningful dialogue. In classrooms and boardrooms alike, people discussed the merits of simplicity versus complexity, tradition versus innovation, and efficiency versus depth. The argument became a case study in communication, a reminder that disagreements, handled respectfully, could lead to growth rather than resentment. Decades later, during a special tribute honoring Eastwood's lifetime achievements, fate intervened in an unexpected way. As Eastwood accepted his award, the audience erupted into applause. Among the sea of familiar faces sat Robert De Niro, who had been invited as a surprise guest to present the final accolade of the evening. Cameras zoomed in on both men, capturing the weight of the moment. For a split second, it felt like the entire room held its breath. When De Niro stepped onto the stage, the tension dissolved into gentle laughter as he extended his hand toward Eastwood. Without hesitation, Eastwood shook it firmly, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. De Niro leaned in slightly, whispering something only Eastwood could hear. Whatever it was made Eastwood chuckle softly, eliciting cheers from the crowd. De Niro then addressed the audience, his voice warm and sincere. There aren't many people in this business, or in life, who've earned the kind of respect Clint has, he began. We may not always see eye to eye, but tonight I think we can all agree on one thing. Clint Eastwood is a legend, and whether you love his style or prefer something else, you can't deny the impact he's had on all of us. Eastwood listened intently, nodding occasionally. When it was his turn to speak, he kept his remarks brief as usual. Thanks for the kind words, he said, glancing at De Niro. And thanks for showing up, Bobby. Took guts after, well, you know, the audience roared with laughter, breaking the ice completely. Eastwood paused, his expression softening as he added, We're different, sure, but maybe that's why we complement each other, in our own weird way. It was a rare moment of vulnerability from Eastwood, met with thunderous applause. The two men posed together for photos, their body language relaxed and genuine. Though, neither would admit it outright. It was clear that years of reflection had allowed them to appreciate each other's strengths, and perhaps even forgive past grievances. In the weeks that followed, fans celebrated the apparent reconciliation, hailing it as proof that even the strongest personalities could find common ground. Social media lit up with posts praising their maturity and mutual respect, while critics hailed the moment as a fitting conclusion to a storied rivalry. Looking back, the clash between Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro wasn't just a headline-grabbing spectacle. It was a microcosm of life itself. It reminded us that differences don't have to divide us. Instead, they can enrich our understanding of the world and ourselves. Whether through art, conversation, or conflict, these contrasts challenge us to grow, to question, and to embrace the beauty of diversity. And in doing so, they leave a lasting mark, not just on those involved, but on everyone fortunate enough to witness it. The years continued to roll on, and the bond between Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro, once strained by their infamous clash, grew into something unexpected, a quiet, unspoken camaraderie. It wasn't the kind of friendship that filled tabloids or social media feeds. Instead, it was subtle, built on mutual respect and an acknowledgement of shared experiences. They didn't collaborate professionally, nor did they spend hours reminiscing about old times. But every now and then, their paths would cross, at film festivals, award ceremonies, or industry gatherings, and those moments carried a weight that spoke louder than words. One such occasion happened during the opening night of a major international film festival. Both men were honored guests, celebrated not just for their individual achievements but also as representatives of an era when cinema felt like magic. As they stood side by side on the red carpet, cameras flashing wildly around them, reporters shouted questions hoping to catch a glimpse of any lingering tension, or perhaps reconciliation, from their legendary feud. Clint, Robert, how does it feel to be here together after all these years? One journalist called out. Eastwood glanced at De Niro, his trademark smirk appearing briefly before he answered. Feels like another day at the office, he said dryly, shrugging as if nothing unusual had ever happened between them. De Niro chuckled, shaking his head. Some days are quieter than others, he added with a playful glint in his eye. The audience erupted into laughter, sensing the light-hearted jab beneath his words. It was clear that the two had developed a sort of shorthand, a way of communicating through wit and understatement. Their exchanges no longer carried the sharp edge of competition. Instead, they seemed tinged with humor and understanding. Even the hosts of talk shows began inviting them to appear together again, curious to see if sparks might still fly, or if peace had truly taken hold. When asked separately about the possibility of working together on a project, both men gave answers that hinted at openness, though neither committed outright. Eastwood, ever pragmatic, simply said, "Never say never." De Niro, characteristically introspective, responded, "If the right story comes along, one that speaks to both of us, why not?" Though that hypothetical collaboration never materialized, their relationship deepened in other ways. Behind the scenes, they occasionally exchanged notes on scripts or offered advice on navigating the ever-changing landscape of Hollywood. Industry insiders whispered about Eastwood consulting De Niro on casting decisions for a gritty crime drama, while De Niro reportedly sought Eastwood's input on directing action sequences for a thriller he was producing. These interactions weren't publicized, nor were they meant to be. They were small gestures of solidarity between two giants who understood the pressures and privileges of their positions. In a world where egos often overshadowed talent, their willingness to support each other, even quietly, spoke volumes about their growth as individuals and professionals. As time went on, both men became symbols of resilience in the face of change. Eastwood continued to defy expectations, releasing films well into his 90s that showcased his enduring vision and craftsmanship. Critics marveled at his ability to adapt without compromising his identity, calling him a living testament to the power of persistence. Meanwhile, De Niro embraced new challenges, venturing into television production and mentoring emerging filmmakers. His passion for storytelling remained undiminished, proving that age was no barrier to creativity. Their journeys inspired countless others, not just actors and directors, but anyone striving to leave a mark on the world. Younger generations looked up to them not only for their accomplishments but also for their ability to navigate adversity with grace. The heated argument on The View had once seemed like a cautionary tale about clashing personalities. Now, it served as a reminder that even the fiercest disagreements could lead to understanding, if approached with humility and patience. In their later years, both men reflected openly about the lessons they'd learned throughout their careers. During a rare joint interview commemorating 50 years of contributions to American cinema, they sat together on stage, trading stories and insights with surprising ease. The moderator asked them directly, "What do you think is the key to lasting success in this business?" Eastwood leaned back in his chair, considering the question carefully. "Staying true to yourself," he finally replied. "Don't chase trends or try to please everyone. Just focus on what matters to you." De Niro nodded in agreement, adding, "And don't be afraid to take risks. Even if they don't always pay off, you'll grow from the experience." The audience erupted into applause, moved by the sincerity of their responses. For all their differences, they shared a fundamental belief in the importance of authenticity and perseverance. Those values transcended their personal styles and philosophies, uniting them in a way that resonated deeply with everyone present. Years later, when reflecting on their legacies, Historians and critics alike pointed to their evolving relationship as a model for resolving conflict and fostering mutual respect. What began as a bitter rivalry ended as a testament to the power of maturity and self-awareness. Their story reminded us that greatness isn't measured solely by accolades or box office numbers. It's also defined by how we treat others and whether we're willing to learn from our mistakes. In the end, the clash between Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro wasn't just a footnote in entertainment history. It was a chapter in the larger narrative of human connection, a reminder that even the most unlikely alliances can emerge from discord. And as fans watch these two legends continue to inspire and influence future generations, they couldn't help but smile at the thought of what might have been impossible becoming inevitable, a friendship born from fire.